Walt, another week, another Waymo headline. This time, Waymo's expand to the land of the rising sun. Another clear indicator that they're the clear leader in the development and commercialization of robotaxis. Over in China, the autonomous vehicle industry is doing one thing, it's growing. And then across the Taiwan Strait, not getting into geopolitics, Foxconn, according to the Nikkei, is looking to make a bid for Nissan in Japan. That could get interesting because then all suddenly we got the Apple equation, which you know from covering Apple. Could this be a signal that Apple might go back into the automotive industry? But first, let's start with the leader, Waymo. What are your thoughts on the expansion to Japan next year?
I mean, it's not obviously a complete shock. It's certainly, kind of reminding people that they're not just something that's going to do a couple of US cities, that they, like Uber and like Tesla, have global reach. It's also interesting that, Tokyo is a population dense market. We've talked on this podcast before about the challenges perhaps due to local rules in getting into New York City. Japan is pretty crazy, although there is a little different. I've never been to Tokyo, but I think one difference is in New York, we finally legalized jaywalking. My understanding is that in Tokyo, there's probably not a lot of jaywalking that existing in Tokyo. So maybe different challenges in those markets. But look, the bigger issue here is international. And I think, one of the things people are trying to make is, well, they have to partner, they partner with this company. Is that somehow connect to Waymo having to partner with Uber? And I think in this case, it might be unique. There might be some requirements in terms of having to partner with a local taxi company. I think they're doing the ride-alongs, or they're the safety driver there. What did you make of the partnership specifically as part of this announcement?
The partnership aspect is regulatory. It's not a plus or a minus for Uber or against Uber. It's the regulatory environment. Uber has to have a partner when they operate in Japan with the taxi industry. It's a clear indicator Waymo's following the rules. They're doing it the right way.
Do you think there's any possibility as well? We've talked about Zeekr and the use of Zeekr. As they develop this relationship, have they even indicated what cars they're using? Because they're going to partner with this company to put the safety drivers in. I assume they're not going to go to this company's fleet and outfit it with Waymo's technology. Do we have any of those types of details?
Jaguar I-Paces are going over. So the I-Paces.
So it's not even effectively dumping this Zeekr inventory that Waymo has tied itself to, and there's still questions about whether those will be implemented in the United States.
We've had photos and videos posted on X and Reddit this week of the Zeekr testing in Austin. I don't see any which way with the incoming Trump administration that the Zeekr scales in America. Waymo has the ability just to write it off. Should they just write the Zeekr off and move on to a different vehicle? Hyundai is coming on in 26, 27, the Ioniq 5. There's a lot of different paths for them to go. Do they just say, "Listen, we made a mistake," and move on?
Well, Grayson, I'm gonna go not into telco corner. This is a little bit of Lightshed Media corner, and point out that earlier today the Supreme Court indicated that they were going to be hearing this suit against TikTok. You know that President Trump has said some favorable things more recently about TikTok. It's not our opinion as a firm that, the president would, if empowered by laws or by the Supreme Court to do things to TikTok, which is, effectively owned by China, whether there can be some bargaining and horse trading and things like that. So I think to the extent that, there are threats of import taxes, there are threats of shutting down TikTok. On the other side of things, there are things that China is asking for. Maybe Zeekr becomes part of an overall bargain that the current administration gets involved with. Because look, there's people within the administration that we talk to on the media side of things that are insistent that no, TikTok needs to be banned. And I'm sympathetic to those arguments, but the reality is, I think, and again, no one really knows what Trump's going to do until it's actually done. He will utilize the ability to bargain and offer some things in exchange for others. Is it possible in your mind that Zeekr becomes part of that bargain and that they're allowed to import these cars to help still a U.S. company, although maybe not at the top of Trump's list of companies that he likes, Google, continue to push forward in terms of Waymo's success?
Do I see it as a bargain? No, even though you can chastise me and say that the president's been close with organized labor, the Teamsters, and you have the gentleman from the ports, he does not like Sean Fain at UAW. I don't see any which way that, because not a union handout to ban it. I just think that you're going to have China hawks that will not allow them to do it, and the Zeekr's not going to create jobs.
There's a lot of China hawks in the administration, and I think the way Trump often operates is you have people that make different arguments, and there's give and take. Look, at the end of the day, Zeekr, when you stack up what's important to China, I wouldn't think that that's high on the list, but you never know how these things kind of fall out in the end. But you're going to be in the camp. I get it. You're in the camp. No way, Zeekr. I'm not saying that I'm going to go the opposite way, but I'm going to say that there is still hope that Zeekr can exist on our roads in the United States and be taking customers in 2025.
Well, you're optimistic. Unfortunately, you might be right. We don't know what's going to happen. If you are right and the Zeekr vehicles are running perhaps in San Francisco, Austin, Atlanta, or LA, would an individual even want to ride in a Chinese-made vehicle?
Didn't the CEO of Ford have one imported to this country and not only drove it, loved it, and didn't want to give it up? I mean, I would say, like, does an individual want to get into an autonomous car at all? And my guess is they get in and they're kind of a little afraid, then they're intrigued, and then 10 minutes later they're bored out of their minds looking at their phone. Look, how many products, most of the products that seemingly that we have are made in China. If it's cheap and it works, then a lot of people end up forgetting their politics very quickly.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. We haven't seen the Chinese vehicles hit our streets, and we haven't seen them hit in scale. Maybe Waymo's going to prove me wrong, and they're going to do it. But if you want to look at creating investment in America, Masayoshi Son's down at Mar-a-Lago down the road. He has a press conference with President-elect Trump where he announces he's going to invest $100 billion to create jobs in America. And President Trump says to Masa, double it. Why, Mr. President-elect, I'll try. But Masa doesn't necessarily have the best track record of creating jobs in America. And he's done some, I'll call them Masa-like things.
Grayson, as you know, I know Masa quite well as an investor in Sprint, and I can go into detail about all of that. But as it relates to this specific promise, 8 years ago, he promised to add jobs and invest, I think, $50 billion, specifically with Foxconn. If you want to listen to or watch the Lightshed podcast for our listeners, I actually had screenshots of that. Obviously, that thing in Wisconsin never really materialized. And on top of that, all the job retention that was promised post Sprint T-Mobile merger, the exact opposite happened. And there was job cuts subsequent to those companies getting combined. A lot of respect for Masa, but he does stuff to pursue his own goals, which most people do in business. Just to be quite blunt about it, take those promises with a grain of salt. It makes for a good kind of headline and a press conference, and I'm sure Masa does want to benefit from the investments that are occurring in the U.S., but beyond that, whatever. Meanwhile, though, Foxconn, as a company, if they can entice one of their existing corporate partners, Apple, to perhaps get back in the game of autonomy, which is certainly getting a lot more public interest based on Elon and what Waymo is doing, there are partners that they can join with, and clearly, Tim Cook has certainly done, of the CEO of Apple, has done a great job at kind of managing the relationships that they have with China, even while moving some of their own manufacturing outside of China, but also maintain that relationship, not being subject to any repercussions based on some of the stuff that we as a country have done to China in prior. So they have a good opportunity maybe to kind of bridge that and play a role. How do you see it, though? I mean, is it too late for Apple to come back into the game with Foxconn as their partner?
Nope, no way. It's not too late.
So where does the technology stack come from then? Does it still exist somewhere in the depths of the great starship in Cupertino? Or do you pick off some people from Cruise and the various other companies that have shut down, or now and some of these people are at startups that, depending on the funding environment, might have limited lives in their own right.
I do not see Apple. Just want to be very clear on this, because Apple did sell the proving ground in northern Arizona, the old Chrysler proving ground.
What's the proving ground? Just a track where cars can drive on?
A secretive track. We have to add that caveat there.
So we can't draw conclusions because some track no longer exists, right?
The technology, the way that it's been, and I'm being sensitive here because I don't want the Apple man knocking at my door.
See, I don't have that problem. I can publicly, and I have publicly smacked Apple around because their AI sucks and no one's buying their phones from their AI. But I know, there's a lot of people that are afraid of the repercussions of Apple. So maybe you should just text me what you want to say.
I'm not afraid.
You should be.
There's a lot of things to be afraid of, and Apple's not one of them. Let's just call a spade there. But the way that Apple shut down Project Titan has not been reported publicly, so I will admit that from what I know of how they shut it down. What I will say, there is a very clear path for Apple to follow the iPhone path. Apple cuts a deal with Foxconn. If Foxconn is successful, this is the Nikkei out of Japan reporting that they are looking to buy Nissan. If they're successful buying Nissan, they can become a fab. Then they start building a custom autonomous vehicle for Apple. Apple designs the user interface, the design of the vehicle, the interior, the whole experience. Then, instead of building an autonomous driving stack from the ground up, Foxconn goes and partners with Wayve. The interesting part on Wayve is Wave's biggest investor is SoftBank. Perhaps SoftBank comes in with a joint venture, and let's not forget that Apple is an investor in the Vision Fund. Now you've got an autonomous vehicle powered by Wayve running the Apple car. And you might push back on this, but this modem originally in this phone was not built by Apple. The chips originally were not built by Apple. There's a gradual path for Apple to start with the Wayve technology or the Neuro technology and slowly develop their own autonomous drive technology and phase it out over time.
I love it. I love those connections you made. Sometimes you make me laugh at some of the, the pins with the strings, and this is connected to that. But you're 100% right. The relationship. And by the way, SoftBank has an incredible relationship with Apple. They were, I think Masa was backstage with Jobs when the original iPhone came out. I may have that wrong, but there is a close relationship at Apple, obviously also at Foxconn. I think that's a fascinating spin. And I would guess also at Apple, let's put my Apple hat on now. There's analysts out there that are pitching a super cycle, which is not happening, which we will find out soon enough. The stock doesn't seem to care about it. Whatever, that's a different story. There was news out today that they were looking at subscription models for the iPhone, that they're abandoning that. If they're looking for other, and by the way, even under Trump, they could lose $20 to $30 billion that Google is paying them to be the default search engine in the phone. So regardless of what, I think all of our listeners probably own Apple, and you're happy about that, they do face problems in terms of growth. And this is certainly not only an opportunity for growth for the company, but if you're talking about time spent leveraging the brand, what the experience that exists in the car where you're spending a portion of your life, where now you may be able to do more things because it's autonomous. There certainly are a lot of arguments to do that, especially if they can offload the risk and some of the financing, as you've described. And none of that, by the way, requires them from announcing an acquisition, because the first pushback that anyone would give you when we spin, some of these theories and these ideas is, well, Apple doesn't buy things. The largest acquisition was Beats, what they spent $4 billion on. It was really an acqui-hire to get into music and some of the people that were involved with that. But this is a way that's effectively CapEx and acquisition price light. So Grayson, I'm gonna give you a stamp of approval on that latest speculation. Who knows whether it's going to happen, by the way, but I think it's logical to see that those steps could follow through.
I'm gonna have to file this in the filing cabinet. I got Walt's seal of approval. This is better than the Good Housekeeping seal of approval. Ladies and gentlemen, Exactly. This is phenomenal. Walt's making this podcast great again. He's doing it. I'm getting the approval there. The interesting thing that this also does for Apple, it reboots the Apple innovation story. The Vision Pro, let's just call a spade, was a failure. It didn't work well.
Now you're just piling on. I love it.
I'm not piling. I'm being honest. Apple is losing the storyline to Alphabet. Sundar Pichai, for all the negative stuff people give him, that gentleman is firing on all cylinders the last 3 weeks with the video LLM, the Willow chip, and then the Waymo expansion. Mr. Pichai is managing Alphabet phenomenally for innovation. Mr. Cook needs to make a move now. And if he says, look, we're going back into autonomy, and oh, by the way, we're doing it in a very CapEx-like manner, then you've got a big competitor. Then they've got to follow the Tesla story and start leveraging the stores. The Apple stores become the dealerships of the future for Apple. They test the technology. They try it. Apple has to leverage those. And Apple, I believe, is probably one of the only companies that can compete with Waymo and Tesla. They've got the stickiness that consumers like and want. Amazon doesn't have that. If you put Thursday Night Football in the Zooxmobile, you're not going to win me over. If you put the Apple experience in the car, you're going to win me over, and you're going to win over millions and millions of individuals. And going back to your China point, Apple, outside of Tesla, is the only international company that I can see running an autonomous vehicle in the United States and in mainland China.
Right, because they know how to bridge that gap, and you know, they're also not. It's not beyond them, because a lot of people might get, you know, listen to this, you know, oh, Apple purist, blah blah blah. They're not beneath chasing narratives. I mean, AI. Look, it's going to be big. So is autonomy is going to be big. Even you could say that the Vision Pro was chasing the metaverse, you know, hype that kind of came and went in a way, right? I get that it's a different concept. So if they're looking and say, what are the big growth opportunities in areas that we play, you know, they're racing towards AI. Obviously, we're very far behind. Apple TV behind on the streaming side. They should probably go out and buy HBO Max as well. Probably won't, because they don't do acquisitions. And this is another one for them to chase after. And at a minimum, because they have such a halo effect, investors, if anyone catches wind of this, you'll have, you know, a couple analysts, I'm sure, that, you know, love to predict things that never happen. That a car is coming, it gets a reason for people to continue to own the stock and buy it, just like they're owning it and buying it for the hope of AI, which is not materializing in the moment.
I got to tell you a little secret, Walt. Some of those analysts on TV, they listen to this podcast. So if you and I turn on CNBC and we see it, we're going to have a here you go moment.
Well, don't predict the TV for 10 years then. Don't predict the TV. Anyway, what's our next topic?
I want to stay on this for a little bit more, because if you look at Apple's trying to catch up on AI, they partner with ChatGPT. They could do it with Wayve, with Foxconn. It's another dynamic that's there.
That's certainly a positive for Wayve, and 100% fits into the Wayve business model of enabling OEMs. In this case, the OEM obviously would be the one connected to Foxconn and Apple. It's obviously, if we really want to go derivative plays here, would be a huge positive for Uber, because I really don't think, in this case, Apple would be part of a more fragmented market and be an input into whatever the Uber and, you know, platform is here and globally. I think we'll see how that develops. Again, only speculation on our part.
Here's the interesting thing on the Uber front. Uber, on the earnings calls, has been very vocal and very public about their desire to work with fleets and how they see fleets as a growing business. On an upcoming episode of The Road to Autonomy, Andrew McDonald, who runs their autonomous vehicle business, is coming on, and one of our conversations is going to be around fleets. Do we get to a point in the future where Uber partners with an autonomous fleet operator? Perhaps that fleet operator bought those vehicles from Foxconn, powered by Neuro, powered by Wayve, and then exclusively runs them on the Uber network, and then Uber gets more supply?
I mean, I think that's the ideal world for Uber in an autonomy future, is to have fleets where other people own them, whether it's Foxconn, whether it's Apple, or more likely a third-party financing vehicle, however that emerges. So, and if you can do that and fragment the market, then they become more reliant on staying on Uber's platform. I guess the question is, how deep do you have to go to get lock-in for Uber on a global basis? Meaning, like, is it enough to be on the platform, or does Uber also have to lure you in by creating depots in strategic locations in all of these major cities around the world where they have operations, with charging, which is tough right now because of power issues, and cleaning? Dirty, literally dirty business, right? Not glamorous, probably not high margin, but maybe helps in the lock-in or the attraction or even just the enablement of fleet growth, which they can then plug in these autonomous fleets that you're talking about. Right now, I think the messaging from Uber is no, not going to go down that path. Let's stay as a software platform. Lyft, I think, might have a different viewpoint. We'll have to look in some of the other rideshare companies around the world and say what they were willing or not willing to do.
I see Uber cutting the deals with real estate and operators and partnering, not actually owning the asset, having a contract and the ability for these vehicles to use it. Because if Uber built out, let's call it, if you want to call it the digital real estate, where you have the contractual, the vehicles can go there to sleep, they can get cleaned, they can charge, and they run exclusively on the network, and you expand that globally. Now Uber's got a whole different story because you're getting supply from Foxconn. That's a whole different narrative.
I hear you. I just don't think that is the way that company thinks about it. And I see the value, but again, the revenue and the cost associated with that is margin dilutive, which is not the way Dara would like to run his business. Let's look at this through Tesla's eyes. Like, they've got the charger network, right? So it's not that dissimilar to what has been value to owning a Tesla is you have the charger network. Now they've extended that obviously to other cars, but maybe their vision of this is different, where they would see in their network having, these depots and charging stations, not only for a fleet that they might own, but in this, this longer term view that Elon has, which is that the car that's in my garage is just going to leave, go pick up some people, and then go to the charger network or go to the cleaning network that Tesla has set up to enable this, on-demand robo network of the future. So that seems like more of would be a Tesla strategy than necessarily Uber at this point. Lyft is probably somewhere in between. It's kind of more of the challenger right now. Maybe they'd be more willing to try and build up one of these, let's call it a service network for where to put the fleets. Or maybe there's a startup out there that will just, start to pick up real estate here and there and establish a position in the market.
Or what if a Blackstone started a depot REIT?
But that's a startup, right? That they're going to fund a third person. Look, if you really want to think big about this, when I go back to those days that I would go to these Uber Elevate conferences, where, like, if they ever figure out the battery technology for eVTOLs, for those that don't know eVTOLs, these are basically the drone helicopters that take 4 to 8 people, whatever it is. So if you have a depot, but it's actually a garage where it's a landing and it's a place where people, can integrate their rides on the eVTOLs for transportation in the future. Yeah, I mean, think big, and there's real estate opportunities for where the new economy is going to go when you have more people using rideshare and autonomy rideshare. You got to think long term for that type of stuff, and you have to build up a revenue model at the get-go that kind of sets stages for the future. We'll see if that type of merger. I think these are things, by the way, that the government can help with, right? Whether it is in terms of zoning or getting, forcing utility companies to get the power that they need, or allow them to put generators in those locations, allow the eVTOLs to actually land and enable commercial operations, and obviously the national framework. There's a lot of components where the government, federal or even local, can play a role in enabling this thing, which will ultimately be good for citizens, good for business, and good for America.
It'll be very good for America. It ties into the America First agenda because it's going to create jobs in America. And President Trump is looking for the $100+ billion investments in America because he's going to cut the regulations and it's going to allow it to go. There was a Parents article last week, and it said that Uber's Robotaxi fears are overblown. And the way that you've broken this down and we've broken it down together, I would agree with that headline. Why is there such a fear on the street from an investor standpoint that Uber has no future in robotaxis, when if you really kind of look at the big picture, there's multiple paths for Uber to have a very big future in robotaxis?
I think the issue is, like any companies, Uber is very diverse, right? They've got Eats and they've got, it's global, right? So you're going to have to deal with regulations in the individual markets. They've got, just the presence of the person using the device, which I think, a lot of people have hoped that Dara would take roles to have like a super app type of thing. But at the end of the day, like, rides is a huge portion of it. And if you think that it ends up being a duopoly of Uber and Tesla, and that both of those companies want to try and develop something as a standalone product as opposed to integrating within Uber, that obviously takes away a big chunk of what makes Uber what it is. And look, even if that's not coming tomorrow and it's coming 2 years from now, that still is going to impact how people perceive the company. So they're in a difficult spot because you're fighting a ghost, right? Even if it's not impacting them today, it's certainly something that any new announcement, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, potentially becomes kind of headline, what investors like to call headline risk, meaning it's the headline that comes across like, Waymo, whatever, goes driver out on freeways in California. That's headline risk. Lyft signs a deal with Waymo. That's headline risk. Wayve cuts a deal with, and funds Robotaxi, fleet in some market in the UK, headline risk. Tesla gets, Palo Alto to do, some type of whatever, some type of Robotaxi there, headline risk. And I can go on and on and on. And those are challenges that they're going to just have to deal with.
The sell-off is there, the data is there, the sell-off, but even the sell-off continues. Uber continues to march forward on their autonomous vehicle plans and their strategy, launching We Ride in Abu Dhabi. That's a big step, a small emirate, but still a big step forward.
To our Uber listeners, I would just say this: like, you generate free cash flow, right? So you don't need your stock to finance anything. So like, who cares? Just do your thing, right? I know it sucks for employees, but like, sorry, this is just how the market works. It also sucks for people that are shorting Apple, that the stock goes up even though they're generating no growth. So it sucks for a lot of people because the market doesn't do exactly what you want it to do. But if you just stick to your knitting and believe in what you're doing and set yourself up to benefit for where the new economy is going to be, which you and I think both agree will be autonomy, then you should be fine. And I think part of that is going to be watching this fleets. I'm just going to ask you, and I think we've talked about this before, but let's get this in the prediction reel. Where will fleets as a percentage of rides, meaning that rather than, a personal owner, but actual fleets, what percentage of rides in 5 years will be in fleets, will be from fleets, like whether it's autonomous or not?
I'll give you a very conservative number, 45%.
I'm taking the over. I am taking the over. So if you look at it in that context, where fleets will be greater than your guess of 45%, and that's whether autonomy then represents 80% of that 45% or not, you've set up the framework for how it's going to work going forward. And it will work going forward. And by the way, 5 years, like, AI is a driver, Wayve and otherwise, of this development. I don't want to hear about, you promised me autonomy in 2016 and here we are in 2024 and it's still not there. Like, keep thinking that way, because I think AI is going to continue to surprise people in how it accelerates the development of product.
It's only going to continue to accelerate. Look what Shadi Ho has done with Bot Auto. In under a year and a half, he's gone fully autonomous because of the breakthroughs in AI with the pre-training data. Uber's going to get there. They just have to continue to follow their North Star of autonomy, continue to, where you and I know this is going, is the autonomy economy. Don't panic. Put your head down. Darkar Shaki, in my opinion, is running a masterclass. And at some point in the future, 70, 80, 90+% of their vehicle inventory is going to be fleets. Uber's going to become, that's where it's all going. The days of the drivers are going away. I'll just say it point blank. It's become fleet. What percentage is autonomous versus what percentage human? I don't know, but that's going to be a massive fleet inventory. And when it does, then Uber's got a massive, massive business.
Grayson, as Jalen Hurts, quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles, has said, you have to have the intensity, control the controllables. He also says the main thing is the main thing. Just control your controllables. Position yourself well, and then, see where the chips may fall from there.
Are you saying this as an Eagles fanboy, or are you saying this from a business standpoint?
Yes, Eagles fanboy and a business standpoint. 100%. Go Birds.
Yes, but they also have to control the narrative. And that's what Mr. Karashaki has to get out there and do a better job of controlling the narrative. This strategy is working, but he's not controlling the narrative.
But they don't have to control the narrative because they don't need the stock to raise money. Unless he's going to make a large acquisition, like the stock, sometimes it's important that your stock does well because you're issuing stock. Like in this case, like if investors want to if investors want to pound this thing down, right? Because they're worried about autonomy, and he knows the reality, and he's putting up the numbers. Just put up the numbers. Explain your story. Explain, obviously do a better job potentially about doing that. But I think they do a pretty good job relative to Waymo and Tesla, certainly in terms of, laying out a narrative. And by the way, and then just buy the stock. Like if no one wants to, if no one, doesn't want to believe you, take that as an opportunity to buy it as a discount because you believe in yourself.
Do you predict that we might see an accelerated buyback by the board on the next earnings call?
I have no idea. I mean, I have no idea. But I think, look, I do think that there's a lot of headline risk. So it kind of is what it is.
It's headline risk, but it's a great company that's going to do big things in autonomy. When you look at doing big things in autonomy, over in the mainland China, James Peng did an interview with the Financial Times this week where he publicly stated that.
Who's that?
He's the CEO of Pony.ai and the co-founder.
Thank you. I want to make sure that everyone's on the same page.
You're well. I'm going to call you Mr. Professor. You're welcome, Mr. Professor.
Brandon and Rich do this on the Light Shed podcast all the time in media world. They just, we might potentially have a diverse audience. So you just can't name people's names and assume that everyone knows who you're talking about. So I correct them, and now I'm correcting you.
I like this. We got the professor here, ladies and gentlemen. James Peng, co-founder and CEO of Pony.ai, came out in the Financial Times interview and said they're going to go from 250 autonomous vehicles in mainland China to 1,000 next year. That's a pretty healthy growth rate for a company that just went public on the NASDAQ.
1,000 cars. When I think of 1,000 cars and I think about numbers, I think about the number that Waymo just released, which is that they added 4 million rides autonomously in 2024 alone to bring their total up to 5 million rides. Now, granted, I get it. It's not like Waymo's got a ton of cars out on the road. And, whatever. Congrats. 250 to 1,000 obviously is 4x growth, but it just shows how we're still early stage in terms of the scaling, and it's still an open opportunity for a lot of different companies.
It's still a major opportunity if you manage the opportunity correctly. The interesting thing that Mr. Peng said in the interview with the FT, they're going to produce their Robotaxi for $41,000. On the last Baidu earnings call, they publicly came out the RT6, and they want to be sub 30,000. Elon's pushing for sub 30,000 on the Cybercab. All the analyst estimates that I've looked at, the common denominator seems to be $150,000 per Waymo vehicle. Is the Chinese market going to force a global price down on the robotaxis where they're going to have to get cheap?
I mean, these are the smaller numbers that I like to hear from you now. Not the 250 or 1,000, but the small price of the car. I mean, what's the real price, Grayson? Like, what is the real price? Because I've seen this in telecom infrastructure with Huawei and ZTE. Like, how much of that is government subsidies? So if you're telling me that I need to compare what Waymo is paying Jaguar or others relative to what, a Chinese company is saying, tell me what the government is paying and if it's a real number.
I can't because we don't have clear, honest transparency.
Right. So this just goes back to policy here and in the West. If you're going to allow the government to subsidize these cars down to a price that, scale works, they're just doing that to promote their own industry within their country, and good for them. But how we should look at that is like, okay, well, how do we deal with our own companies, primarily in the U.S., America first, but obviously in Western nations, to make sure that we have alternatives so you don't become reliant, especially as it relates to something like autonomous technology.
We have to incubate the technology. This technology was incubated going back to the DARPA Grand Challenges and the DARPA Urban Challenge. And then when, lo and behold, politics got in the way, the unions had hemorrhages, this technology got derailed, sidelined, but it never gave up. We need to make this America First technology because if you look at the public statements by President Xi and the CCP, they want to export autonomy to the world. And we can't get to a same situation that we're in with electric vehicles today where we're dependent on China. This has to be, the technology was incubated here, government money funded the creation of this technology. It has to become an America First technology that if we do choose to export it, we can export it.
Yeah, look, there's a number of ways to do that. There are a number of ways to attack the problem. But again, this is how we started out referencing TikTok, and there's tools in the tools box, and we'll see what happens, probably sooner rather than later. It's got to be a top agenda item.
I can confirm for a fact it is a top agenda item of the incoming Trump administration. Where that falls in the priorities exactly and what movement we will see, I'm unsure. I'm looking for a truth post by President-elect Trump where he talks about, don't forget now, he's an automation expert. The president said this on Truth. He's an automation expert. He studied it. President Trump, sir, if you studied automation, you know that autonomous vehicles, autonomous trucks are good for the U.S. economy. Give us a truth statement so you can accelerate the growth of this industry. Because autonomy is not just going to go for robotaxis, autonomous trucks. It's also going into defense, and it's expanding. It's drones, and it's cold outside. We're getting ready for Christmas here.
But Grayson, I have a question for you. What exactly is the president not an expert in? Because I've seen him exclaim that he is the smartest person on any number of different items. And most recently wore a hat that I think said, what? I was right about everything? Was that what that said?
That's correct. President Trump was at his golf club today, and he wore a new MAGA hat that says, Trump was right about everything. It's a pretty impressive hat, and you got to have cojones to wear that hat.
So I know that he's the expert on autonomy. I personally, going back to, I'm sure one of the things you're referring to is the dock workers and the autonomy of taking shit off a dock, which is frankly done around the world and needs to be done on our docks. Again, we'll see how that plays out. I think a lot of times people focus too much on individual statements and lose sight of the fact that statements can be used to position. And let's look at where things end up versus where initial statements are made. I deal with this with Rich on TikTok all the time, where like every single utterance that the president makes on TikTok is this, perceived as this like definitive answer. I'm not convinced that that's always the case, but we'll see.
I'll give you a definitive answer. I'll give you a definitive statement. I have a hat that says make autonomy great. And that's what we're going to do.
Get your orders in on those.
Yeah, get your orders in. That's right. It's red, and I even got a blue one in if you want to go into areas that a red hat would stand out. I have blue ones too. And pink ones for the ladies. We always got to get for the ladies.
You have blue make autonomy great hats? That's amazing. Make one with the color of a flag. Let's just red, white, and blue. How about that?
Okay, if you wear it on the air, how's that?
Not going to happen.
Oh, come on. We'll get you to do it. Maybe I'll get our friends at Kodiak to do it. Did you see this video? I'm going to play this video for you. They're up in northern Michigan, operating in the snow in their F-150, fully autonomous. The interesting part, they were able to do that with Gen AI. So you talk about the breakthroughs in AI, talk to their CTO, Andy. They did that because of Gen AI. That's a big breakthrough right there. But operate in fully autonomous in the snow in northern Michigan. It's cold out. There's a lot of snow. What do you think?
I think that's great. And I'm not surprised. I do get a lot of people questioning, they're always in these markets where the weather is always good. Like LA never rains in LA, or it never rains in Miami. I mean, I think, there's some bad weather that occurs from time to time. Isn't it when it gets really cold down where you live, the lizards start falling out of the trees? So it even gets cold sometimes. They freeze up, right?
Chicken of the trees. People eat them. They put them in their car and they eat them.
Oh, God. I heard stories where they fall from the trees. These idiots I'm going to take it to the pet store to save this poor iguana, throw it in the back of the car. The thing heats up, comes back to life, or comes out of its hibernation and starts going bananas and claws the person's eyes out. Is that another Florida man story?
It's very true, but the all-time Florida man story, an individual hits an alligator, felt bad for it, put it in the back of the car to take it to the veterinarian to get better. Well, the alligator wakes up and chomps the person. That's a Florida story.
Florida man. Love the Florida man stories.
The great thing about Florida for Christmas, there's palm trees. There's no snow like what Kodiak's dealing with. We got Christmas on the calendar for next week. We got gifts. We got wine. We got champagne. Hopefully, Elon, if you're listening, buddy, FSD 13, send it my way. I'm going to wear my pajamas, and I'm going to leave the champagne on ice. I'm going to be responsible.
Put it in Grayson's stocking. Put the FSD 13 upgrade in Grayson's stocking.
You would make my stocking great again, and I'd appreciate that. Outside of Christmas, Walt, we have anything we need to look for next week?
No, just sun, beach, snorkeling, just good times. Everyone relax. Have a great holiday.
Have a great holiday. Have a Merry Christmas. The future's bright. The future's autonomous. The future is scaling autonomy profitably. Walt, until next week.